Hello and welcome to another episode of Refresh Perspective here on Heavenward Thinking. Today we're going to continue on in Luke chapter 14. We're going to look at verses 7 through 11. So I'll read it and we'll get right into this week's discussion. When he noticed how the guests picked the places of honor at the table, he told them this parable. When someone invites you to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for a person more distinguished than you may have been invited. If so, the host who invited both of you will come and say to you, "Give this person your seat." Then, humiliated, you will have to take the least important place. But when you are invited, take the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he will say to you, "Friend, move up to a better place." Then you will be honored in the presence of all the other guests. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. What can we look at here with this idea of humility and exalting ourselves?
Well, this should change every single Bible study. This should change every single Sunday school. This should change every single meeting I've ever been in. This should change every interaction I have with every Christian person, right? This concept is clothe yourself in humility, right? Like that's the whole idea, right? The whole idea should be you should not want to be the first to talk. You should not want to make everybody know your ideas. You should not want to think with arrogancy that what you think and how you think it, and you should wait until you're asked to talk. Right? Like I said, I've seen this played out in meetings before. I was literally, again, just talking to about this week, saying, hey, I've sat in meetings where for 2 hours people have gone around and around, everybody said, and then finally somebody says, okay, Joe, what do you think? Right? Because they haven't talked for 2 hours. And they lay out a plan and everybody goes like, oh yeah, well that's good, let's do that. Right? And you're like, we just wasted 2 hours. Right? So frequently, the people who don't talk, we think it's because they don't have anything to say. No, it's probably because they've learned a couple principles that are really true. Number one, don't argue with fools, right? And number two, they've learned, hey, if you just let this whole thing argue out and let everybody get it out, they'll come to a place of reason. Because in most moments, people are so gung-ho on what they have to say and what they think and what they want, they're not willing to listen to anybody else. But again, this whole concept of when you're not willing to listen to somebody, you might be humbled and have to go to the bottom because somebody might say, that's a dumb idea, right? Or like, no, you're just wrong type of thing. But we won't do it. But this ought to change every single Christian meeting and get together and activity that we have. If we were all working on humility, right, nobody would talk. If they would be super short meetings, it would all be great.
Yeah, like you said, this should change everything in the Christian community. If we actually were working on our own humility, each of us, rather than trying to force other people to be humble and being arrogant ourselves, if we were working on ourselves and being humble, then it would change things because we would live out of that humility and honor other people, and we wouldn't be having this pride problem that constantly gets in the way of our relationships, both with God and with other Christians and non-Christians. We see this whole parable that Jesus mentions here that he gives these religious leaders about someone coming and taking the place of honor and then having to be removed from that place and take the lowest place, and then someone who takes a humble position then getting to move up to a better place. Like you mentioned, that can work in conversations and meetings. It can work in so many areas of our life where if we would just not take the most important place, if we wouldn't try to get the best positions of everything in life and always be perceived as the best or most important person, then maybe we would actually get elevated by God himself rather than trying to elevate ourselves, because the important part, I think, is that last verse. If we exalt ourselves, then we're going to be humbled. Whereas if we humble ourselves, God promises he's going to exalt us and lift us up. Why wouldn't we want to follow that verse?
Yeah, the problem is most prideful, opinionated people think that because they have the loudest voice and they say it with the most intensity, that everybody wants to listen to them. No, nobody wants to argue with you anymore, right? Like, so it doesn't mean you always have the right opinion, right? Again, humble people, those are the people that other people want to go talk to. Nobody wants to go talk to the proud person and ask them questions, right? You want to go to the humble person. I sit in meetings, so do you, all the time. When you find somebody who, number one, like, they can't look at you when you're talking back to them. because they're formulating what they want to say and they're thinking about what they got to say. They're not listening to what you have to say because they have no intentions of ever entertaining what you have to say. Right? So they're just ready for the next thing. They're just going to shout over you and tell you that you're wrong. And if you ask them to repeat, I love that little thing. Could you please tell me what you just heard me say? Most people can't tell you at all what they heard you say because what they decided was from minute one, I wanted it to be white. You said it's going to be black, so you're just wrong. Right? This whole thing, God promises, I'm going to humble you. Right? I will humble you if you have this prideful spirit. And that goes back to what we said the last. Like, prideful spirit is when you think your interpretation of the Bible is the only interpretation of the Bible, right? And then you got a real problem in this whole area. I really truly believe, right? This is one of the most important sections of all of the Gospels and what Jesus is teaching us. Here is the Spirit of Jesus, who didn't think he was above anybody, humbled himself even to becoming one of us, which is humbling in nature.
Yeah, I love how you mentioned that the ultimate example for us of this concept of humility is Jesus. We see that in Philippians chapter 2 when it shows us how Jesus, as you said, he didn't have that pride. He humbled himself, became one of us, and then subjected himself to the worst kind of death, the lowest kind of death on a cross. He humbled himself in that amazing way. And if Jesus, the Son of God, the Word in the flesh, if Jesus could do that, then how can we not be humble ourselves? How could we look at Jesus and say, well, that was great that you came down from heaven and you died on a cross as a human, fully God and fully human. You died on a cross for me, but that's great for you, but I'm going to be prideful and I'm going to think that I'm so great. If we looked to Jesus, rather than just looking at ourselves in a mirror and going, wow, I really like what I see, I'm a great person. If we look to Jesus instead, then we would see the example of humility right in front of us, and then we would want to be like that. Because if we're going to be a follower of Jesus, then we have to live like he did, and he lived a life and a lifestyle of humility. Hopefully that's something that we are doing on a daily basis and not being like these religious leaders who have this pride problem.
Yeah, again, Jesus ought to have the last word in every single setting. That's why ending things in prayer is so important, right? But it's not that way. Most of the time it's somebody else has the last word. And they think they're being Jesus, but being Jesus isn't just in what you say. It's how you say it, right? So if you're screaming somebody down with love, you got maybe the right concept, but you got the wrong Jesus as far as how he would present that. And that's what's important in these moments. It's a pure humility. You might be sitting at the head of the table because you do know all kinds of things, but Jesus might ask you to go to the end because you're not being Jesus about how you're saying it.
Absolutely. Yeah, tying this all up, the idea here of, remember, we are to be humble in every situation, not try to take the place of honor, not try to be exalting ourselves above other people, but letting God lift us up as we are humble on a daily basis.
Amen.
Well, I hope that you've been challenged and encouraged by this, and you'll join us next time for another episode of A Fresh Perspective here on Heavenward Thinking.